Hello once again, Internet. My name is Nicole, and welcome back to my channel. I'm here with my husband, Ivan, and today we are going to be discussing Hild by Nicola Griffith. But first, we'll talk a little bit about what else we've been reading in the past couple of weeks. So what else have you read in the past couple of weeks, Ivan?
Nothing. I've been finishing up Guns of Empire when I had the chance, and then I switched over to Hild, and that has occupied most of my reading for the last couple of weeks.
Okay.
Plus, as you know, I was busy last weekend because you were visiting, and we did lots of stuff.
Yes.
And didn't really get that much of a chance to read. So
that's true.
I had hoped to finish several books by this point, but I have not.
Okay. I finished a couple books, but they were all audiobooks because, as Ivan just mentioned, I was up in San Francisco visiting him last weekend, and that's like, I drove, and it's like a 7-hour drive, so I listened to audiobooks all the way up and all the way back. So I finished a couple of things. Actually, like 3 weeks ago now, and I forgot to mention it last time, I finished Obelisk Gate by N.K. Jemisin, which was a sequel to the 5th season. It was a book that I was really, really excited about. And I liked it. I didn't like it quite as much as the first book in the series, but I liked it. And then I listened to The Last Days of New Paris by China Miéville while I was driving. That one it's real weird. It's like a novella. It's probably a short novel or a novella. And it's really weird.
Why is a China Miéville book not weird?
I mean, it's really weird. I don't know.
Yeah, okay.
It's set in Paris during like World War II or a little after World War II. And in Paris during World War II, there was like a spontaneous outbreak of magic, and the magic is tied to like surrealist art. So like there are these manifestations, is what they call them, and they like center on like a person's surrealist art or something like that. And so there will be like little pockets of areas in Paris that are just like crazy, batshit crazy, surrealist stuff going on, and like the things that get manifested like wander off from there. So it's just real weird. I don't know. Like the concept was kind of cool, but then there wasn't much of a plot, and I was just kind of like, okay.
Yeah.
There's lots of interesting imagery going on, but like I don't know what's up with this.
So prototypical China Miéville, basically.
Kind of. I don't know. It's kind of the first thing by him that I didn't really care for that I've read. Like I really liked everything else that I read by him. I don't know why this one was just like not. I was just like, I don't know about this. I am not on board with weird.
I mean, The City in the City was like a more immediate plot and good pacing, and Perdido Street Station also like had an interesting plot in the 200 pages or so it takes him to get around it, and if you can survive that, then I think you will like the book. But which brings us a little bit to this book, today's point of discussion.
Yep. So
Nicole, what did you think about Nicola Griffith's Hild?
I liked it. I know Ivan had a hard time finishing it, so I feel like he's not gonna like it.
Tell us about what you liked about the book.
So I thought it was a cool. So the book is it's basically like a historical fiction set in sort of medieval or like collapse of the Roman Empire time era in Great Britain. And our main character, Hild, is a princess. So she's the daughter of a prince, and the prince is killed pretty early on in the book. Her father is killed pretty early on in the book. And so she's
dead at the start of the book.
Well, no, not like the first 2 chapters. He's still alive. They're just in exile, and then he actually gets killed. And so her uncle becomes the prince of their region, and eventually through conquest becomes like an overlord of a much larger region. And and so she's raised by her mother. So her mother has a dream about Hild when she first gets pregnant, that Hild is going to be the light of the world and like light the way. So she kind of sets things up for her daughter to have her be like a prophet or a seer. And so she becomes like an advisor to the king. And that's a lot of what the story is about, is her trying to interact with. It's a very political intrigue type of story, I think, with Hild trying to interact with the power structures around her. I just thought it was a really interesting dynamic, and like I really enjoy political intrigue sorts of books. Like in fantasy, that's one of my favorite things, is when there's kind of that political intrigue plot element. So I really enjoyed that. So I liked this. It is a much slower book than I think a lot of the two previous books we've read together. Yep. But I really enjoyed it because I really liked the political intrigue, and I really liked the kind of intricacy and the character focus of the story. And I think the author did a really great job with like developing all of the characters, and those things were really interesting to me. And now Ivan can share his thoughts.
So, I mean, I got, when I last talked to you about it, I was really not digging it, and I think I got a little bit more into it as the plot went on. But overall, it's kind of interesting. You'd see on Goodreads, like, it's divided into two camps: people who really love it, and then people who are like, way too dull and tedious for me. And I kind of have to agree with the way too dull and tedious part of it. I think that the pacing is just so slow and so plotting, and the characters are here and there, and some of them are interesting, and some of them just show up for a page, and she goes into this almost excruciating detail about how their world works, and how their society works, and the geographical locations, and the environments, and you know, if you have your characters traveling from one place to another and it takes them 7 days, it shouldn't feel like it took you 7 days as a reader to read it. I feel like after finishing this book, the 400-year wait for the Normans to come in and finally just put paid to this pathetic society is not a very long wait. So it was dull. For me, it was dull. Even at the best times, it was slightly less than dull. The best parts of it, the political intrigue, the character interactions, just are separated by long chunks of nothing happening or nothing interesting happening. The characters themselves, I mean, Hild is just sort of, I don't know, like written as kind of a genius, but...
Well, Hild is like a child for most of the story. I think the author did a pretty good job with having a child protagonist, because that's always difficult.
Yeah, I mean, she's a child for like the first 20% of it. Then she's more like a teenager. She's between, for the broad majority of the story, she is between 10 and 15 years old. Yeah. But most of the stuff that happens to her is between 10 and 14. Like, and the stuff when she was like 4 or 5, that's the stuff that I found like the most insufferable with her just being like spontaneously inspired. I was like, this is a 4-year-old. She's not gonna have thoughts this complex. Just skip. But I think for most of it, she's not really a child, because in that society, a 10-year-old is already kind of becoming like...
You had to function.
They don't have an extended childhood. They don't have a teenagehood. They don't have their like goth Wicca phase. That's their adulthood. So by the time she's 10, she's already given responsibility. She's given, you know, she gathers up her household. She gathers up like a slave.
She has more responsibility at 10 than I did, than I do as an adult.
Yeah. So, and from her point of view, you don't really get much like she's never a child. If she was supposed to be written as a child, then the author failed, because even as a 4-year-old, you don't get the sense that you're dealing with a child character. That I don't know. In my opinion, that's kind of how she is. Everyone was dull. I mean, there are very few characters that are particularly interesting.
I don't know. I thought the characters were interesting. I think we're just gonna have to agree to disagree on this one. Like, because I think the author does a really good job of kind of like subtly developing a lot of the characters, and you're not just like you know, they're not stereotypical. They're all very unique, and they all have sort of realistic reactions to the things that happen around them. But like most people are kind of boring.
If you can, yeah, I mean, some of them, if you can tell one apart from another, yes. I mean, for her, like, childhood friends, for, what's her face, Begu, and for Kian, and some of the other people, like, develop as people. It's interesting, I don't think Hild ever develops as a person, or at least not that much. But some of her friends develop as people. They, you know, they have life events happen to them. This should be called like life events in the early 7th century in a backwoods Northumbrian kingdom, chieftaindom, the book, because that's what it is. It's a chief who's trying to get more power by politics and war with other chiefs. So he sends out his massive army of 50 guys to go fight their massive army of 50 guys, and things happen, and people die, and then there's new power. I mean, what she does well is, I think she's trying to portray this changing Britain, where the German tribes and the Celtic tribes and the Gaelic tribes and the Scottish tribes, you know, who've basically had 400 years of minor intertribal conflicts without much changing in the world. You know, they've been fighting since before the Romans took over, and when the Romans took over for about 400 years, they just hung out and let the British tribes basically do what they were doing. You know, they played them against each other and allies and enemies, but it's all it's all that history kind of period is just minor tribes fighting with other minor tribes for territory and stuff. And this is kind of the period where it starts to change, in the sense that while Rome as an empire, as a cultural entity, is going away, Rome as the church is coming in. So you have Father Paulinus and Stephanus, and they're manipulating events to basically, you know, the church already by this point has a grasp on Kent. In Canterbury, the Archbishop in Canterbury, the first Archbishop in Canterbury, was appointed about 20 years before this book was set to start. And then, so the church is spreading its influence north. And what actually a lot of this book is about is how the church is spreading its influence north. So it's almost, what's that book that's set in Africa with, like, it reminded me of that.
What? That's a lot of, that could be like anything.
It's set in Africa about the conflict from, like, the old tribal society and their way of life and religion, the coming of the missionaries, and things fall apart. That book.
Oh, okay.
You must have heard of that one.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So it reminded me a little bit of Things Fall Apart in that sense, and how their Norse-esque religion is sort of falling out of favor, and the priests are coming in, and things are kind of changing, and the king doesn't really want things to change. You know, this king was like a saint now.
He is?
Technically, yeah, he's saint. Well, maybe non-canonical. He had a minor cult about him, but he was the first. He was the first king of Northumbria to get baptized, and which we see happening in this book. So it was kind of a big event. So, but he was, by all accounts, kind of a crappy, indecisive king. Not sure if he was the asshole that they kind of painted him in this book to be, but he was a meh king, and is kind of fallen out of favor. Hild is a saint. Did you know that?
That I did know. Yeah.
Yeah. So she was apparently an abbess. She founded an abbey and then a second abbey before she died, and was apparently a talented administrator and a very smart person. So that would have been interesting. Unfortunately, we get her as a kid.
Well, I think the author plans to write other things. She plans to write future books about Hild.
Oh, I see.
So she probably will write about that at some point, or like write about her future life at some point. At least there was an author's note in my edition that said that. I don't know. I don't know if that was on the Kindle.
There's no, I didn't read it entirely.
Okay, yeah, it mentions that in the author's note that she plans to write other things with Hild.
So, yeah. So, I mean, apparently there's a lot of stuff that can happen to her after, we leave off in this book. But I think that it's just, she strove for historical accuracy, but she failed in terms of, for me at least, in terms of storytelling, in many ways, in terms of characterization, in terms of pacing. It's a very plotting book, and it's plotting all the way through. It never really picks up. There's moments where it kind of picks up a little bit, and then it goes back to plotting, and it kind of just peters off at the end. It just sort of peters off. No great events of significance. Hild gets married off. That's the end, the events of great significance.
I mean, that's significant for her, no?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, questionably historically accurate, since we don't know if she had any children or ever married.
Yes, but we don't know.
Because she was technically, so her dad was the nephew of King Edwin, the guy who was the king for most of this book, and he was poisoned. And so historically, she went to live with King Edwin for a while. King Edwin didn't last all that long. King Edwin only lasted about 10 more years after High King Redwald's death, and then the descendants of the king that Redwald displaced took over the region again. But I don't know. I don't know if any of that actually ever touched Hild, because she was never really considered a contender for
because
power.
She's a woman and therefore was not in the line of succession.
Yeah. Well, she was a woman and she had no heir.
Yeah.
And therefore was not in the line of succession.
Yes.
So, which is kind of weird how they married her off, because it would have been rather more convenient for King Edwin for her not to be married off, to be straight up given to the church and never to have an heir.
That's actually true. I hadn't thought about that. That is actually true. Now that I'm thinking about that does make things a little strange at the end.
Chances are she actually never married by choice, because that might have put, things into a perilous situation for her husband and her heir, whoever that might be. But also interesting. Also, this book doesn't really ever really clarify what her ideas are on the church. Like, we know the actual Hild was an abbess, so she was a figure of some prominence in the church and in her society in general, because apparently a lot of people went to her for advice. This Hild is like broadly indifferent towards any kind of religion.
Yeah, but she's still really young, so when did she become an abbess? If she becomes an abbess in like 20 years, that's a lot of time to have your idea of religion.
Yeah, she becomes an abbess about 20 years from the end of this book.
So, I mean, that's a long time.
Yeah.
To have thoughts about religion if you're a young kid. I did think it was interesting, going back to the spread of Christianity northward, how she was like so interested in writing, like when they first encounter writing, because like her society just doesn't have writing, and so they first encounter writing, and she's like, "Wait, so you mean I can send messages and people will see the actual message and it won't like get confused by the messenger? This is awesome!" And everybody else around her is like, "Why would we do that?"
You're a bunch of ignorant things.
I just thought that was funny. But no, I mean, it's something that I hadn't really thought about, but it is true that the Catholic Church, like bringing writing, like that was a smart thing to do. And it, obviously it allowed them to administer a much larger area. But I guess I hadn't really thought about like the consequences of the fact that most priests were literate, and like for a long time they were the only literate people like in a village or whatever. I hadn't
Pretty
really
much,
thought about
especially in Europe, like especially in the Northern Europe. So, I mean, it's really a culture clash of this sort of clannish tribal society and the centralization and organization of Rome. Even after Rome as an empire fell, the reason that Rome was so successful was their infrastructure, they had a legitimate civilization. It wasn't just like one group of guys and another group of guys 50 miles away and each has their own quote unquote king. It's like king over like 200 people, great. And they fight and there's 50 other people like that in a 100-mile radius and nothing ever gets done. Whereas Rome had central law and administration and justice and had advanced much more as a society. So this is sort of the time where all of that sort of tribal stuff in the north is getting... Rome tried to... Rome did conquer Britain, but they never were able to really hold it because all they did in Britain was just send armies. And they established forts and they built walls, but they didn't do the things that made Rome, an actual empire in Southern Europe, which was to take people and to make them Roman, to homogenize them, to integrate them in their culture. They never really did that. And this is actually when that process, that cultural shift starts to happen in Northern Europe, in England. You have Charlemagne, you have the Scandinavians who sort of joined Charlemagne and evolved into the Normans, who are later the people that conquer England, end the Anglo-Saxon rule, essentially, and begin to turn England into a unified kingdom and an actual society and culture, which we know. This is the boring part of history. This is why this book pissed me off so much. I'm like, these people are of no consequence. Their petty struggles are of no consequence. In 200 years, the Scandinavian Vikings will invade, literally wipe Northumbria from the map, wipe pretty much all records of anyone's existence from the map, including Hild's abbey, to the point where we only really know a couple paragraphs about her from like a codex of like integrated oral history. And then the Vikings are going to hang around for a couple hundred years until the evolved Vikings in the forms of the Normans come in and basically unite the kingdom under their rule, under William the Conqueror, and then split it actually back into the Normans under one of William's sons and the English under another William's sons. And then England becomes a unique cultural entity, and they start, having Shakespeare's and stuff, and having something of significance to global culture.
A brief history of English conquest by Ivan. I don't know.
The Dark Ages in Britain are dull. Because it's just this chieftain and that chieftain and this chieftain and that chieftain. And, at the end, she's like, the author's note was just like, I just wanted to sort of show this period of time and the people there, and we have to remember they're all human. And I'm like, sure, but they're boring. They're really dumb.
I like learning about, I don't want to learn like in great detail, but I like reading about a book about a period of time in history that I've never really heard of before. I mean, obviously, you know a lot more about this than I do. I like knowing what people's lives were like 1,000 years ago and being like, I don't want to do that, but it's cool that you did. I don't want to learn what honey is best for making mead, but it's cool to know someone knew that once.
Yep. I appreciated the inclusion of preeclampsia in this book.
What do you mean?
Keon's wife has preeclampsia, or actually straight up preeclampsia, which turns into eclampsia.
Oh, okay, yeah.
when she swells up and has seizures
Yes.
and delivers her baby.
Yes, Ivan is talking about
A pregnancy-specific disease.
Yeah,
Yes.
disease.
That was a brief, bright moment in this book for me.
Showing that pregnancy is problematic. Well,
Preeclampsia, yes. I don't know. As far as this period in time and various civilizations reading about, I would much rather be reading about 6th century China, or like maybe the establishment of Kievan Rus, which happened around that time ish, or like
Kievan Rus is Russia, more or less.
It's sort of the unification of like migratory Scandinavian culture with local European culture to found what would eventually become Russia, basically. And then the Mongols came, and then that would sort of shatter that. But then the remnants of that then became Russia. So.
It's the city-states that happened before the Mongols that then turned into Russia, basically.
The Byzantines were interesting around this time. The Greeks were relatively interesting around this time. Rome was kind of interesting around this time if you like reading about a major train wreck.
Yeah, if you like a train wreck that you...
Yeah, if you like a train wreck, Rome was fascinating. Britain, just not very interesting. Honestly, not very interesting until Elizabeth.
I don't know. I'd actually you couldn't really do this historically accurately, but I feel like the North American, like the Mississippian culture, this is like the proto-Mississippian culture, they're like just getting started in North America at this time, so that could be interesting.
Yeah,
I would think they are. I guess we don't actually know that for sure.
I'd rather read about like the massive South American empires that were apparently giant and spanned huge chunks of what is now the regrown Amazon and their society. Like, so much of that is lost. It would be very hard to do like a historically accurate account, but just like an imagined account of that civilization, because that civilization was truly great. Maybe, I don't know if it was this point in time or maybe a couple hundred years later, but that was a massive, like, centralized sort of cultural powerhouse back then. So that would be interesting. The Middle Ages to me are not super interesting. Rome is interesting. The Renaissance is very interesting. The sort of the age of empires, the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s, early 20th century, the fall of the empire stuff. That's very interesting. British redneck chieftain A fighting British redneck chieftain B. They're not even British, like German. They're all Saxons there. The British...
I don't know. I think it's fine. I'm fine with learning microcosmic history about pretty much anywhere, so I was okay with it.
Or they're just not that unique. They don't really have unique things about them. They're just clans that fight, and that's really all they do. I am clan. I fight other clan. Oh look, the British clans under Hendrik of Mercia are uniting. Oh no, and I mean that I was hoping by because she already starts writing about that about 50% mark of the book, and Pendrick, or is that his name? Pendrick of Mercia or Pen something?
Yeah, it's not Pendrick
of Mercia. He is the person. He ultimately conquers that area and he kills Edwin. And they already were starting to set that up 50%, or the author was starting to set that up 50% of the way of the book. So I was really excited for that to actually happen in this book. It doesn't. Nothing happens in this book.
That's not true. Lots of things happen. They're just not things you're interested in, apparently.
Yeah. Anyway, so did I like this book or did I dislike this book? I didn't dislike the book. Like I said, I started out really not liking it. I got more into it as it went on. But I didn't really, I thought it was okay.
Okay.
For that, all that I might sound angry, I just thought it was okay.
All right, that's a thing that happens. So I'm just going to say our book for next time that I've been picked is Arabella of Mars. And then the book 2 weeks from now that I'm picking is Ghost Talkers by Mary Robinette Kowal, because I have it out from the library and it needs to go back this week. So I want to read that book.
Ghost Talkers.
Yep, it just came out. It's a book set during World War I, and like spirit mediums are like a real thing. They can talk to ghosts. And so soldiers, like intelligence soldiers and things for the British Army, are trained that when they die, they, as their spirit, have to come back and check in with a medium. And so it's about someone in the Spirit Corps who's one of the mediums who talks to ghosts.
During World War I.
Yep. You sound like you think this is going to be really cheesy. That's the face I'm getting out of Ivan right now.
No, this sounds interesting. This sounds kind of promising. It sounds maybe fun.
Okay.
And I'm excited to read a book that's a bit more fun.
All right. Well, I think Arabella of Mars is going to be fun. It looks like
I think so too. I think it looks like just like a grand adventure story in space, which will be pleasant, especially after this one. So
yes,
yeah.
So we'll be talking about Arabella Mars in 2 weeks, September 25th, I think. Yeah, probably at 2 p.m. Although maybe we'll be late again. We'll see how on top of life we are.
Okay.
All right. Do you have anything else you want to add, or think we're good for today?
Nope, not really.
Great, that's it. Well then, we'll talk to you guys in about 2 weeks. And
thanks for watching. Thank you for joining us.
Bye.